Hello again, everyone, and welcome to Health Center at S.U.N.Y Downstate Medical Center in Brooklyn. I'm Lorraine Brooks, and I'll be your host for today's show. I've done a couple of shows in the past on the topic of domestic violence, and in the past I've interviewed a physician and a social worker and people who were involved in the clinical side of it, the treatment, understanding what happens, and we've talked about it from a societal or a clinical point of view. But on today's show, I've invited a guest to be with us who's going to address this issue on a personal level. She's somebody who experienced domestic violence in her family as a child, and today she is very open about talking about it, and she has agreed to come on today's show. She's actually an employee here at Downstate Medical Center. Her name is Nicole Sharp, and she's the assistant to the dean of the College of Medicine here at Downstate Medical Center, and I'd like to welcome her to the show. Thank you, Nicole.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for agreeing to come on the show. I know that you're going to be a great deal of help to a lot of people who are experiencing this problem. I just want to give a little bit of background for the viewers so they can understand a little bit more about the topic. I know years ago we used to call this domestic violence, and now the trend is to call it intimate partner violence, because I think that creates a broader definition. It's not only male to female or female to male. It could be male to male or female to female. Mm-hmm. Or it could be parent to child or guardian to child. And we certainly have a lot of blended families now where there are grandparents and other relatives in the home who also are perpetrators. So now we use a term that's more inclusive as intimate partner violence or intimate violence. But I just want to read a couple of statistics and give a brief definition. The definition that is most often used nowadays is domestic violence is a pattern of coercive tactics that include physical, psychological, sexual, economic, and emotional abuse perpetrated by one person against an adult intimate partner with the goal of establishing and maintaining power and control over the victim. So it's not just physical violence. It can be violence of other sorts: sexual, economic, emotional. I'm going to come back to that in 1 second. I just want to read a couple of statistics here. An article that I recently read that was published in the Journal of Professional Practice for Nurses says that domestic violence or intimate partner violence affects 1 in 4 women in the United States at some point in their lives. Depending on how domestic violence is defined and how the data is gathered, the incidence can range from 1 in 3 to 1 in 5. So that's quite a few women. That, mm-hmm. No matter how you look at it, that's 25% of women in this country. Although men can also be battered, nearly 25% of women in intimate partner relationships are battered versus only 7.6% of men. So this is primarily a woman's problem.
Right.
And I know that you had told me that your mother was the victim of intimate partner violence.
Right. But in 1991, November 22nd, Friday night, my father murdered her in front of my siblings, my younger brother and younger sister. I was there as well, but I was on the second floor.
Okay.
Yeah. It was a crazy night where he, as soon as my mom came home from work, he just picked a fight with her as he normally does. But it just seemed very calculated. And he just ended up beating her and then finally shot her to death.
Did you at any point, I know that I've been to a number of conferences where they always call attention to the fact that many women who report the violence or who try to get help for the violence, that many times that leads to the perpetrator actually becoming more angry and puts the woman in actually greater danger at times. Do you think that was the case with your mother and father? Do you think that his behavior was a reaction to something?
No, my mom never reported any violence against her from my father. Actually, my father, after beating her on a number of occasions, he would call the cops on her, and then when the cops would come, he would say, "She attacked me." I just found that was just so crazy.
Mm.
And he did this on a number of occasions. But my mother would never press charges or tell on my father.
So he portrayed himself as the victim,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
and he justified his violence by
Right.
saying it was a reaction or it was a response to something that she had done.
Right.
You knew as a child, though, that that was not true?
Correct. I mean, from as long as I can remember, I just have memories of seeing him abuse my mother, from raping her when I was about 4 or 5 years old, to putting guns to her head while she cried, and begged for her life. I think it gave him some kind of a rush.
Mm.
But I just grew up seeing these things all the time.
Well, according to this definition, and I believe it is true, it's about power.
Definitely.
A lot of times, and control.
Right.
A lot of times we see people who are victimized and we don't understand why they stay. We don't understand why they put up with it, why they tolerate it. But when someone has a pattern of behavior that is so calculated to keep control over you, it's very difficult to leave that situation. Would you not agree with that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, my mother tried to leave my father a couple of times, and for a couple of months we would stay away at her mother's house. But then she'll always end up going back. Once he claimed that he was going to kill himself if she didn't come back. He worked for New York City Transit on the train tracks, so he said he would throw himself on the third rail.
Mm.
And I guess she didn't want that burden on her, so she went back with him. One time, when she ran away from him with me, he picked me up from school one day. I was in first grade, so I was about 6 years old, and called her and told her that if she didn't return to him, that she would never see me again. And it was just these threats that would force her to go back to him.
Do you think he would have carried out any of those threats?
I don't think so. I don't think so. And I believe today that if a man tells you he's going to kill himself, that's a problem that he had before the female came into the situation.
Mm-hmm.
And if he's going to do it, he needs help, but it has nothing to do with that woman that he's with.
Well, you just said something very important, because I think that guilt is a lot of plays a large role in the way people interact with each other sometimes. And I know that people who are skillful at power and control often use guilt very effectively.
Right.
And you're very correct to point out that if someone is threatening suicide, that's a problem that exists apart from any domestic violence situation that might exist. But a lot of people don't understand that. And it is the guilt that makes them go back, don't you think?
Because they blame themselves, I believe. And there's a lot of brainwashing going on with the abuser to the victim. And it's just control. They just feel like they have to be with this person. And this person, the assailant, would also convince them that they don't have a life outside of them.
Mm-hmm.
So even if they try to leave, unless they get concrete help and persist with that,
Mm-hmm.
they'll always end up going back to their detriment.
To their detriment.
Mm.
So it's a problem that gets worse over time and not better.
I believe so, yes.
Can you give us an example of you use the word brainwashing? Is there something you remember from your childhood that you would put in that category?
Well, my father would always compare my mother to me, and he would always tell me how smart I am in front of my mom, and he would say, "Don't be like your mother. She's so stupid. She's dumb. You're so beautiful. Good thing you look like me, not your mother. Your mother's ugly. She's disgusting." And I would see her put her head down and just walk away, and I know that she'll be crying inside and outside, but she wouldn't want me to see that. But I knew, he destroyed her inside. And by using me, which was so horrible, I felt so bad. I didn't know if I should take his compliment as a real compliment or just as a scheme to get to my mother. And that was just part of his brainwashing. He made her feel like she was stupid, ugly. No one would want her if she left him, and she believed these things.
Do you know how old your parents were when they got married?
They were in their My mother, she was 24. My father was 31.
So he was not significantly, but he was somewhat older
Yes.
than she.
Yeah.
Do you think that played a role, that her age might have played a role in her development or the development of the relationship?
I believe so. It's interesting that I was told when my mom met my father, he was in need financially, and he was an immigrant to the United States, and he was just living in a one-room apartment. He didn't have a good job, and she actually helped him get a better apartment and to get a better job, which was his job at New York City Transit. And then he would throw that in her face afterwards, and
How so?
he would boast that he makes more money than her, although she helped him to get that job. Very strange.
As a child, growing up in this environment, that you've said you felt certain things, and you seem to have had a lot of insight, even at a very young age, as to why your father was behaving the way he was. You mentioned that you thought he was manipulating her, he was brainwashing her, he was using guilt, he was using physical abuse at points. I think sometimes what happens is we don't give children enough credit. When I say that,
Right.
I mean a lot of people think that the children don't understand what's happening, or they're too young to really get it, or they're too young to really put two and two together. But from what I'm hearing you say, even at a very early age, you recognized that there was something drastically wrong. And I think that's important for us to know, because children are affected, even at very young ages, very profoundly.
Yeah. I knew exactly what my father was doing to my mother at a very young age.
How old were you when you had your first
Memory of
memory of that?
4 years old. That was the
And what
rape.
happened?
That was the first memory of abuse.
What happened?
He just started beating on her, and they were in the living room, and I was in the hallway past the kitchen, so I could see what was going on. And next thing you know, he just started tearing off her clothes, and I remember her scratching his back, and I remember these 4 scratches on his back that she put there, and she was screaming for help, and he raped her. At that time, I didn't know it was rape until I became a teenager, and then I realized, oh shoot, my father raped my mom. That's what that was. So it was like reliving it again. But
What did
yeah.
you do? What did you do at that moment? Did you feel like you needed to do something for her or to protect her? Or?
I wish I could have protected her. And I did grow up with guilt as well. I think it was such a dysfunctional family. I was taught by what I saw to not say anything or not do anything, to just ingest it.
Did he tell you that directly? Did he say don't
No.
ever tell anyone?
No, but my mother did tell me not to ever tell anyone.
And did you? You never told anyone?
I told my grandmother. My grandmother knew. I mean, the whole family knew, but my mother used to beg them not to say anything, not to do anything.
Why do you suppose that is? Why do you think she didn't want anyone to do anything?
She
Or
was
to know?
she was in love with my father, but I think it was such a psycho type of love that wasn't, there was no reason to love someone who beats you and abuses you and shames you in front of your own children. And it's the brainwashing as well. I guess I know she was very fearful of my father and what he would do to her if she told.
Do you think that, and I don't know if you can answer this question or if it's even a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway.
Okay.
Do you think that sometimes people might confuse love with something else?
Yes.
The reason I say that is because I think, again, when we hear about women who are in this situation, I think one of the first things people who are not in the situation may think is, well, why doesn't this person leave? What is holding her there? And very often the answer is, well, I love him or I love her. And then the next question, of course, is what you just said. Well, but how can you love someone, or why do you love someone who treats you this way? So it's a very complicated kind of dynamic. It's really not that simple.
It's kind of like being addicted to drugs, because I think my father was addicted to being an assailant, an abuser, and my mother was addicted to being his victim, and it just became part of her, and that was part of him before he even married her, because I've heard of stories of when he was a child, he was always very violent. So it's just something that he just carried into the relationship.
So he had a history.
Yes.
I don't think that's very unusual. I think
Right.
that's pretty common. I sometimes think that we ignore the signs. We
Yeah.
know that people have a history, or we know that people have a temper. We call it a temper. We know that people have some predisposition to behave in aggressive ways. We kind of ignore that when it's
Right.
convenient, you know. I know that you do a lot of writing about this
Yeah.
topic. Do you find that the writing helps you
It's very
to
therapeutic.
judge it? Okay. In
Very.
what way?
It helps me to get all those feelings out. I mean, I've been writing since I was 6, and I always used the writing as a way out, just to block out what I was seeing, all the abuse, all the screaming, the anguish, the pain, and everything my mother was experiencing, my father's rage. So through writing, I just felt like I was like in a different world. I could go any place I wanted to go, and I just grew up with that. But this story, I write a lot of stories, but this story is one that I've always avoided writing because it's just so very painful. But I decided very recently I'll just write about it in a blog, which will kind of force me to write on a regular basis. So I have this blog called Ward of the Court.
Ward of the Court?
Yeah, WARD, wardofthecourt.blogspot.com. And so I write on it like every other day. Just memories as they come to me of being with my parents. And my primary objective is to get it out of my system, but also to help people who are in similar situations as my mother.
And you find that writing actually helps you get it out of your system?
Yeah, it sure does.
Who reads your blog? Do you know?
I don't know how many. Some people do read it because they leave comments.
Okay.
So as long as I can reach one person, I feel like, my work is done. But I'll continue writing.
So that's one thing. That's your blogging, which is sort of your day-to-day kind of catharsis of getting things out. But you do other sorts of writing too, do you not? I read some of your poetry.
Right. Yeah.
And do you find I'm very interested in writing myself.
Okay.
I used to write many years ago, and I found it also very therapeutic and cathartic, even if no one reads it. But I want to give you the opportunity to share some of your poetry with our viewers today, if you don't mind.
Okay.
I know that some of your poetry is very moving, and I know that it was created as a reaction to some of the things that you're going through. So do you have a couple of things you'd like to read for us?
Yeah, I have a poem here. It's called The End of November. It's about my mom. She died at close to the end of November. It also means the end of good things, her life and all that she meant to me. So I wrote this right after she died. Cold night, cold floor, stiff wind, white lights, silence. My mommy sleeping like a baby in a pool of blood, her hair in 2 corners of the room, and my daddy standing over her. He painted the walls with her generosity, goodness, joy, and peace, the carpet drenched with her laughter. Time continues in slow motion. Enveloped in this superhuman suspense, my mind is spent and my whole world is bent. His calculating camouflage made him into an innocent witness to a crime, so sublime that he fooled himself into thinking he could fly away, like a crow in midday stealing young corn. But beyond him, I mourn for my siblings, who look at the child in me and call her mama. Yes, it was a cold night, cold floor, stiff wind, white lights, silence. It was the end of November. And then I have, at the end, dedicated to mommy and all the victims and survivors of domestic violence, including the children.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that with us. I really have to say that I both admire your strength and courage, and I appreciate your doing this, because so many people experience so many negative events in their lives, and don't talk about them. And I think if you are willing to talk about things, as you say, you not only help yourself, but you help other people. Is there another poem you'd like to share with us?
I have another one that's supposed to help women who are in abusive situations to have strength and faith in themselves. It's kind of unconventional because there's a blank in it where a person has to put their name. Okay. It starts out, it's called God Kissed Me and Created Art. Who are you to try to hurt me? Do you know who I am? I am, and I have a blank, your name here. I am to be put on a pedestal in a museum, to be admired. While you are trying to destroy my heart, God kissed me and created art. Who are you to put your hand on me? This piece of art that God spun together. Do you know who I am? I am. You are to stand back and marvel at me. Do you see the sign? Do not touch. Who are you to call me names? Do you know who I am? I am. And my artisan is God. Do you see the guard over there? He's saying, shh, because in my museum there is silence as you adjust your shades and bask in my glow. Who are you to cheat on me? Do you really know who I am? I am. I am a masterpiece of the master craftsman. You are to keep your distance, take out a pen and paper, and take note, because there is no other like me. Now let me show you to the exit now that you are done playing your part. But while you're looking back, remember, God kissed me and created ours.
Thank you. That was beautiful.
You're welcome. Thank you very much.
One thing that stood out to me in that piece, and I want to ask you this question. Do you think that art comes from pain?
I think that art can come from good things as well, but I do believe that the most profound art does come from pain.
How? How do you think what do you think the connection is between pain and the production of something?
I think it's a need. That's where the beauty comes from, the need to survive and to have a clear mind, because when you experience things like I have, you have to have some kind of outlet, and you have to be able to escape it somehow. And somehow this art of being able to write was born from that. I guess it's a gift from God, but it's something that I don't know, if I didn't have it, I don't know how I would have been able to survive mentally, psychologically, spiritually.
What did your siblings do? How did they survive?
My sister, she writes as well, but she reads more so. She loves studying history and finances for some reason. She loves numbers.
Okay.
That keeps her level-headed.
So everyone has their own way of coping, their own
Yes.
way of surviving. And for you, that was to produce poetry and your blog.
Right.
I want to, we're running out of time. I want to make sure that people know how to get to your blog so that they can read it if they want. It's
Blogspot.com.
We're going to be displaying that on the screen as well so people can have a reference to
Okay.
that. And the other thing that I wanted to ask you is, are you working with any agencies that work with victims of domestic violence?
Well, right now I just started working with a representative from UNIFEM,
UNIFEM.
and they're a facet of the United Nations that deals with violence against women worldwide.
Okay.
And there happens to be a base locally here in Brooklyn on Eastern Parkway.
Okay.
So I've just made contact with them. I'm still waiting to have a meeting with them. And then at Downstate here on the 30th, October 30th, from 12 to 2, we're going to have an information table where we're going to be giving out brochures and other pamphlets with information regarding domestic violence and how to escape, and different programs that people could take advantage of.
Okay. I'm not sure that that date of October 30th may not make this
Okay.
show. I don't know when exactly this show is going to be aired, but I think it's important for people to know that these programs exist,
Yes.
and that there's information available all the time in the communities, and certainly online if you have access to a
Right.
computer, that there are a lot of places. I know New York State has an Office of Domestic Violence Prevention, which also has a lot of resources and information available. Well, Nicole, I want to thank you so much for your inspiration and your courage for being on today's show. And I'm sure that your story has helped a great deal of women and will continue to help a great deal of women in the future. And I really appreciate your spending this time with us today.
And I thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for watching Health Center. I'm Lorraine Brooks.